시작해요. 네.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to meet you at the World Knowledge Forum 2021. I am Kang Sil, and I will be moderating the session. In this session, we are dealing with the topic of terra incognita, the spirit that is needed to live in a new changing environment. What should we look back on? And what kind of vision should we set forth? That is going to be the topic of today's session. We are now undergoing a pandemic for our second year, and so the climate issue has become a serious issue and is being highlighted. It is not just an issue of the mankind, it's a planetary issue, so it calls upon us to make a transformation. We have three speakers with us, and I would like to introduce them to you one by one and then listen to their presentations. From from Yale University School of the Environment and the Divinity School, Professor Mary Evelyn Tucker. She is co-director of Yale University Forum on Religion and Ecology. And leading cosmology is the philosophy that she has researched and is spreading this idea around the world. Journey of Universe. The project was also translated into Korean. And the second speaker is Ms. Karena Gore, who is the founder and executive director of Center for Earth Ethics. And she's teaching at Columbia University's Earth Institute. She focuses on the moral and spiritual dimensions of the climate crisis, and she tries to look for alternatives to the current issues. And the third speaker is Professor Ki-won Sung, who is teaching at Yonsei University, and she is the co-chairperson of People for Earth. She focuses on the ethical issues from a scientific perspective, and she has served on many boards and committees, and she served as a member of the Fifth Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. Uh, I would like to ask Professor Song to go first, and then Professor Gore, and then Professor Tucker in that order. And after each presentation, the moderator, I will try to summarize the presentations. So Professor Song, please go ahead.
요. 어,
Hello, everyone. Uh, Ms. Kang Sil and I have founded People for Earth, so it's nice to see her again. And I've always been meaning to meet with Ms. Gore and Ms. Tucker. They have uh, been very active on the scenes, converging many issues, including the environment and social issues. And Professor Tucker is well known for being educated under Mr. Berry, and she has studied a lot on ecology, and so it's an honor for me to be in the same session, and it's a personal honor and very meaningful. This year, the summer was very hot in Korea. In the beginning of June, we used to have the monsoon season, but that was pushed back to September. And so these strange weather patterns are quite minor compared to the global scale climate crisis. There were heat waves in North America causing hundreds of fatalities in California, Siberia, Greece, and Turkey. There were forest fires that broke out, and in China and Germany, there were floods and also caused hundreds of deaths. We are seeing these series of natural disasters. About 7 years ago, the climate change due to global warming was considered just a myth by some people, but this is now a reality, and all the people, there's no one that will deny that global warming and climate crisis is upon us. And the natural disasters used to occur in the less developed countries, but now we are seeing these natural disasters and extreme weather events in the advanced nations. So no country is an exception to the climate crisis. And now we are going through the pandemic for our second year, and uh, it seems that we were on our recovery phase, but now we have the Delta variant, and the situation is worsening. From 2012 and 2013, the scientists have predicted that we will have these types of global scale pandemics. And even after COVID-19, we will have other pandemics because the human race have destroyed the habitats of other life forms, and we are living in an interconnected world. With the destruction of the habitats, uh, the people come into contact with the animals, and the contacts are global in scale. So we have these uh, diseases that used to break out in animals that break out in humans as well. I would like to show you a picture by Paul Gauguin. The title is quite long. Where do we come from? What are we? And where are we going? And I would like to find the answers to the questions one by one. So, uh, I did talk about COVID-19 and global warming. The human activities have led to extinction of many species. According to the UN report in 2019, 1 million species face pressing extinction. And according to science, in 2020, about 500 more vertebrate species would be lost in the next 20 years. And according to the 2019 UN report, it said that by 2200, 41% of amphibians, 13% of birds, and 25% of mammals are expected to go extinct. So, uh, we call this the sixth extinction. Throughout the history of Earth, we had five extinctions, and the most serious one was the third extinction. There was a volcano that exploded in Siberia, and the temperature of the Earth went up by 6 degrees, and 95% of the species on Earth became extinct. And the recent one was the fifth extinction when the dinosaurs became extinct. There was a meteor, right, that struck the Earth, and 70% of the species on Earth became extinct. And so it took about more than 10 million years for the species on Earth to recover. The global warming and the pandemic are caused by uh, some human activities, and they may lead to the sixth extinction. Compared to the other extinctions, the sixth extinction is different in that the speed is quite fast. And so this is taking place at a very rapid pace, and it's not caused by external forces, it's caused by the man made activities. And the human activities that are causing the possible extinction and global warming is also shown on the crust of the Earth. The surface of the Earth, when it undergoes different changes, we name it differently. We're now living in the Cenozoic era, Holocene epoch, but the man-made activities have caused such a huge impact, and people are saying that we should name this epoch Anthropocene. And a Dutch scholar had first proposed Anthropocene, and it is becoming more of a common term. And this is because many chemical fertilizers are used and it was absorbed into the soil, and nitrous oxide, the green gas, about 250 times more is produced, and a lot of plastics are buried, and there is the factory farming. People are now, to produce more food for the people, there's this practice of factory farming, and we breed a lot of chickens. So, in wherever ground we dig, we come up with chicken bones. And the number of birds that are grown through factory farming far exceeds the number of birds living in their natural habitat. These changes have taken place, and the reasons are as follows.
중심의 문명이라는 것을 우리
We are already aware that the main cause is the modern civilization. In the history of humankind, when you think of the modern civilization, it did bring about the values of respect for individuals and the values of individuals. So we did make a lot of advances. Yet at the same time, we have accumulated tremendous amount of consumption together with growth, and through the industrialization process and through the consumption that we made, we pursued humanism, the human-centric values, to be able to make such a progress. It was because of this humankind's ambition that they pursued that we are currently witnessing various events such as the extinction or the pandemic or the climate disasters. The UN IPCC panel made an announcement last month that after the industrialization, the average global temperature has risen by 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we would be able to stop the temperature rise at 1.6 degrees Celsius only by reducing the greenhouse gases from 1 billion to 0 by 2050. Then, if that is the case, we've been emitting these greenhouse gases through industrialization process, but would we be able to cut it all the way down to zero emissions? Every year, we are producing 51 billion tons of CO2. How is it possible to go from 51 billion tons to net zero? Is it possible? Through industrialization and modern civilization, we have been pursuing humanism. Yet, as of now, I do not believe that the past version of humanism is no longer valid or relevant in the current times. And I believe that there's a good understanding of the current situation that we are placed in. Starting from several years ago, ESG has emerged as a central value system for the business sector. This is an understanding of a need for companies' social responsibilities, environmental responsibilities, and good corporate governance. Um, what is worrisome is that the ESG has become something like a fad, and it's become a catchphrase that's used by a lot of people without taking the necessary actions that are needed. And what was notable on my part was that before we came up with vaccines and pandemic of COVID-19, as a matter of fact, reduced just about 5% of the CO2 emissions. Even during this pandemic period, when we discontinued a lot of human activities in industries, just a 5% reduction in the CO2 emissions, that means that it mainly comes from the consumption or the burning of fossil fuels. As such, without a transformation or a shifting to another civilization, maybe it could be very difficult for us to be able to achieve the target that we set. We need to make a transformation of civilizations. Instead of simply talking about ESG, we need to make a shift from the civilization based on industries to the one that's based on life, on the living forms that exist on the earth, the rivers, mountains, and other forms of life, non-human lives that should be given the rights to. Now we see an increasing trend and call for the enactment of the Earth Law that will assign rights to those living forms on Earth. That is the change that we are currently witnessing. But when we think of the Earth Law, this is an issue. If we're going to assign rights to the nature, such as the rivers, doing so would have a symbolic meaning and symbolic significance. But think we need to have some entity accountable for the rights of those nature, because the natural entities cannot be held accountable. And in that respect, I believe we need to make a shift in our way of thinking. Of course, we cannot expect a drastic change in our value system all of a sudden. Yet, we need deep reflections on where we are on Earth and regarding these environmental system and ecosystem. I understand that starting from several years ago, people have been showing a greater level of interest in the history of Earth, the universe, and the history of humankind. And all of those approaches were taking a broader perspectives in understanding our history that is needed in order for us to gain an accurate understanding of where we are. There are millions of species that reside on Earth. And we human beings are only one species out of all those millions of species that exist on this planet. As I mentioned before, the annual CO2 emission volume is about 51 billion ton. And without innovations, without technology and science, we wouldn't be able to solve this problem. I'm not saying that science and technology will be a panacea for us, but without the help of technological and science innovations, we cannot really fundamentally resolve this crisis. As I mentioned before, even during the pandemic, where a lot of industrial activities came to a stop, there was just about a 5% drop in the CO2 emission. That means that what we eat, the way that we live, the way that we travel, all of these activities are based on energy, and that means that we need to resolve the issue of energy. That's something that we need to do to find a feasible solution. In order to resolve this energy crisis, we are trying to utilize geothermal energy and small-scale nuclear plants, as well as hydrogen-based power generation approaches. There are many attempts, however, there haven't been clear attainments or the track record that was demonstrated to us yet, which means that we need to make greater efforts going forward. And so far, we saw a lot of emissions created by the plants and factories. And I understand that there is an effort to reduce the emissions coming out of those plants and factories. And now, instead of carbon, there's an attempt to use another type of energy source to run plants and factories. This synthetic biology approach is a novel attempt that we're making, and the living systems or the living things will be utilized, or our understanding about those living things will be applied to the production processes at factories. Again, this means that we need innovation in science and technology, and we need to establish some guidances and principles on trying to pursue these innovations in science and technology to address the crisis that we face as humankind. Through the opportunities like the one that we're having today, I believe and I hope that we'll be able to come to a greater realization and figure out our next steps. Thank you very much for your comments. Professor Song talked about the sixth extinction and the issues related to the transformation of the crust. She mentioned that it took us about 10 million years to be able to recover from the last extinction period, where 75% of the species became extinct. We talk about ESG and a lot of solutions to climate crisis. Yet at the same time, I believe that the professor was trying to cast some skepticism as to the current discourse on this topic. To have a more realistic understanding of the current situation. There is a matter of consensus building. Would we be able to build some guidance in terms of ethics in trying to do this? Next, let me invite Ms. Karina. Actually, yeah, the next speaker will be Karina Gore from the CEE.
대표님.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the World Knowledge Forum and Kum Sul Kang for this gathering, for gathering us together, and for your work. I am honored to be sharing this session with Kiwan Song of People for Earth. Thank you for your comments. And Mary Evelyn Tucker, the pioneer and preeminent scholar of the field of religion and ecology, and a source of guidance and inspiration to me personally. It is exciting to be in a gathering of people from all over the world, a gathering grounded in the Republic of Korea, thinking together about our global challenges. We are interconnected on so many levels. Some experiences can make this interconnectedness seem like a vulnerability. The spread of COVID-19, the climate impacts that land hard in certain places as a result of the aggregated actions from other places, and the rapid influence of disinformation on the internet. But if we put our minds to it, our interconnectivity is a force for the awareness of mutuality and the realization of collective strength. The intention of this session is to begin a discourse about the new community, ethics, and value of life that are required for the future. First, let me emphasize that word required. This is not optional. We are now living within a pattern set by the current value system, which is based on short-term monetary gain, no matter the pollution, depletion, or inequity that results. One consequence is the climate crisis. As the recent IPCC report warns us, and as we can see for ourselves with the frequent and lethal extreme weather events, it is urgent and perilous. We must change to a value system based on the long-term well-being of the whole community of life, which of course is a value system that accounts for the real costs of pollution, depletion, and inequity. If we do not do this, we will stay in this pattern and on this trajectory, and larger swaths of our planet will become uninhabitable for human beings. We must understand that this crisis is about more than data and technology, as important as they are. More than half of the greenhouse gas pollution that has been put up, that is in the atmosphere now, has been put up there in the last 20 years, which is the time period we have known most about this. And we've had the most viable solutions and alternatives such as solar and wind energy technology and power. Also, nearly half of the infrastructure carrying fossil fuels, which is the main driver of climate change, has been built just since 2004. So we do need more than just the data and technology. This is about perception, beliefs, ethics, and values. A discourse on these themes is indeed required. Our civic discourse is actually already full of moral claims, even if they are not presented and examined as such. The call for economic growth itself is often made in such a way as to implicitly claim that it will result in the most good. But we must ask, for who? The way that economic discourse draws the circle of moral concern is a root cause of this crisis. We must widen it to include three groups that have been left out: marginalized people who are living without monetary wealth, future generations, and all non-human life. World knowledge doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes it comes from the bottom up, and is even generated from those who are most left out. The widening of this circle of moral concern can be done by drawing on insights from three movements that are currently underway: the environmental justice movement, the youth climate movement, and the rights of nature movement. I will say just a word about each of them. The environmental justice movement focuses on the fact that toxic sites are always located in marginalized communities. The same activity that is the main driver of climate change, the extraction and the burning of fossil fuels, also causes local pollution that harms human health, including respiratory and cardiac conditions, cancer, and mental and emotional ailments. Sometimes these places are called sacrifice zones, and there is growing awareness that racism and discrimination against low-income people play a role in creating them. Now, there is a movement, the environmental justice movement, led by those in these communities to stop this pattern. And the movement is not just about fairness to them, as important as that is, it's about the health of the whole society. If we had been paying attention to the well-being of these communities rather than pushing pollution into them, we would not be in this emergency that affects all of us. The youth climate movement has brought moral force and organizing energy to the effort to forge a new ethics. It is powered by the theme of intergenerational justice, with young people speaking not only for themselves, but also for those who will be born in the future. It is undeniable that they will inherit this mess that we have made. Remember Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg saying, "How dare you?" on the stage of the United Nations. And there are many other youth from all over the world who say the same in their own way. Their use of shame is both powerful and totally appropriate. The rights of nature movement seeks legal standing for natural entities such as rivers, mountains, and ecosystems like the Amazon. The current dominant value system treats nature primarily as property, devoid of rights and subject to destruction by whoever claims ownership. This movement aims to protect it by pulling it into the category of rights-based claims that most legal systems are designed to respond to. It draws on the work of Thomas Berry, a thinker that Our next speaker, the esteemed Mary Evelyn Tucker, knew well, as has been mentioned. It also draws on the wisdom and ways of indigenous peoples who have long perceived and interacted with non-human life as powerful beings in their own right. There are now some examples where this indigenous worldview has been incorporated into the rights-based legal system. It is a difficult and challenging field, but it is also an important conversation. There is also a movement for the human right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. So although they are not perfectly polished or systematized or settled, all three of these movements, environmental justice, the youth climate movement, and the rights of nature movement, have risen from the ground up and hold real knowledge for the new earth ethics we must forge together. Let me close by saying that we must be vigilant against false solutions. Now that it is undeniable that the climate is changing, there are many who used to deny that who've shifted to saying that we must simply adapt to it. This makes no sense because it is a moving trajectory. If we do not fully transform, there is no end point to adapt to because it will keep getting worse. There is also a claim that new technologies will save us, but some of these new technologies are not proven to be effective and may even have unintended side effects that make matters worse. We cannot afford such a foolish gamble. Instead, to address this ecological crisis, we must look at the level of cause, not just the level of effect. That means redrawing the circle of moral concern to include marginalized peoples, future generations, and non-human life. This leads to action to curtail the main drivers of the crisis, such as fossil fuels, rampant deforestation, and the destructive practices of the industrial food systems. It means investment in positive solutions, such as ecosystem restoration, which can bolster carbon sinks to fight climate change and provide good work for people who need it. And it means changing social norms that currently encourage gross overconsumption and waste by some while tolerating deprivation for others. This is a beginning for the new earth ethics we need for the future. Thank you.
네, 카레나고 대표님 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gore. Professor Song talked about the life-centered civilizational transformation and the need for building consensus on such need. Ms. Gore talked about going beyond data and technology and the need for us to create a discourse from a more holistic perspective. And she also warned about a very light conviction that technology and science will just solve the problem for us. And at the same time, she made a point about the need for incorporating the opinions and voices of the marginalized people. She talked about the three movements that are currently underway regarding this topic, including the nature right movement, a youth climate movement, and so forth. Next speaker will be Ms. Mary Evelyn Tucker from Yale University Forum on Religion and Ecology.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. Many of us are particularly concerned about a new and more comprehensive ethical basis for a flourishing Earth community. There are varied responses to this challenge that Honorable Kum Sing Kong has raised for us. Her work in founding People for Earth is noteworthy in this regard, and our hope is that other such groups are emerging around the world. I'm pleased to share this panel with Madam Kong, Karena Gore, a good friend, Professor Kiwon Song, co-chair of People for Earth, and I want to also thank Ai-Dun Lee, whose work with People for Earth has been significant. Let me begin with some comments on world religions and ecology as a source of new Earth ethics. I will be drawing on the 25 years of work directing the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology with my husband, John Grimm. Then I will reflect on the cosmological ethics of Journey of the Universe that we created with Brian Swin. This is a film with a book, which is translated into Korean, and we hope that you will enjoy it in the future. Each of these projects has robust websites along with monthly newsletters, which we recommend to you. The projects were inspired by our teacher, Thomas Berry, who also inspired People for Earth, and some of his books are available in Korean. First, the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. All of the world's religions have views of nature that form the basis for various cultures valuing nature. We need to include these perspectives along with science and technology, economics and business, policy and law, as Corinna Gore just said. These are all necessary but not sufficient without the ethical and spiritual basis of the world's religions regarding care for the environment and compassion for those suffering the consequences of environmental degradation and climate change, now all over the world, and especially highlighted in these eco-justice movements that Corinna referred to. In response to the question of how we coexist with nature, my husband and I organized a series of 10 conferences on world religions and ecology at Harvard from 1996 to 1998. Let me pause and say we began those conferences because of my study of East Asia. I first went there to Japan in 73, 74, and those of us studying East Asia realized as China, Korea, Japan all modernized, and India as well, the planet would be changed. And we needed the values from this part of the world. And that's why we congratulate Korea for holding this World Knowledge Forum. From these conferences, we identified common values from the world's religions for a broader environmental ethics. We call them the 6 R's. First, reverence for the earth and its profound ecological processes, respect for Earth's myriad species, and an extension of ethics to include all life forms. Third, reciprocity in human-nature relations. Fourth, restraint in use of natural resources. Fifth, responsibility of humans for the continuity of life. And sixth, restoration of ecosystems for the flourishing of life. All of this involves a revaluing of nature as a source of life, not simply a resource to be exploited. This involves highlighting the intrinsic value of nature, not only its use to humans, as implied in ecosystem services, which monetizes nature in relation to humans. This intrinsic value is what Thomas Berry called a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. He also helped us to understand the cosmological dimensions of the world's religions. Let me give a few examples from the East Asian religious traditions: Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. Confucianism has an extraordinary sense of the continuity of being, the triad of cosmos, earth, and human as one dynamic unfolding force, and humans as cooperative agents with cosmos and earth complete this magnificent evolving process. And in fact, Dui Ming, the great scholar of Confucianism, says humans are co-creators with Earth in aligning with the great processes of ecosystems and species interactions of interdependence. Taoism has one of the most extraordinary teachings on how humans are the microcosm of the macrocosm. So similar to Confucianism, and they share that cosmology of heaven, earth, and human. But they say in particular, our body and the body of the whole cosmos are interacting. And the health of our bodies is reflected in the health of all Earth systems. So well-being can't simply be for humans, but for human-Earth relations for all future generations, again, as Corinna mentioned. And finally, Buddhism, we know, has one of the richest teachings on the interdependence of all life forms. This pratitya samutpada, the together rising up of things. And many of the schools of Buddhism in East Asia also say all life is living and alive and sentient. Sentient, meaning has certain forms of differentiated consciousness. And this is what we're missing in the West, because we have said consciousness is only in the human. So we could go on and talk about chi as matter energy and the animate nature of the interconnected processes of nature. That's what East Asia has to offer in a powerful, powerful way and an antidote to the reductionism of Western thinking. So with these cosmological values and the ecological principles in mind, there are numerous examples from the religious communities of grassroots environmentalism. These are featured on the Yale Forum website as engaged projects. I hope you'll look there after this. We have also launched a new database of faith action on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, namely those focused on climate change, energy, water, consumption, life below water, and life on land. And we can highlight some of the engaged projects in religion and ecology on forestry issues, for example. In India, the Chipko movement in the foothills of the Himalayas began decades ago with Hindu women hugging trees to prevent them from being cut down. This was to honor the Shakti, the sacred life force in the tree, and to ensure that deforestation did not contribute to landslides. In other parts of India, tree saplings are offered from various Hindu temples to encourage reforestation. In Southeast Asia, Buddhist monks in Thailand and Cambodia have been ordaining trees to ensure their protection against logging. In 2019, the Sikh community has pledged to plant 1 million trees across the world. And in Africa, Wangari Maathai won the Nobel Peace Prize for her work in creating the Green Belt movement. She was inspired of women to plant trees. She was inspired in this by both her Kikuyu indigenous traditions, along with her Catholic belief in the sacredness of all creation. Secondly, let me turn to Journey of the Universe. In addition to the world's religions, we're also looking to science, especially evolutionary science and ecology. And that's why we value the comments of our first speaker, who so eloquently brought science in. So thank you, Hyewon Sung. But we need a more comprehensive understanding of the universe and Earth that's given rise to life in all of its diversity and complexity. Without this perspective, we can't create a full-bodied ecological ethics for the shared future of the Earth community. And that's why we made Journey of the Universe film and book in response to Thomas Berry's eloquent call in 1978 for a new story. This took 10 years to do and many decades of thinking with Thomas Berry about it, because he knew that cosmology and ecology, science and values needed to be interwoven for an integrated evolutionary story. So Journey of the Universe weaves the findings of modern science together with the enduring wisdom found in the humanistic and religious traditions of the West, of Asia, and of indigenous peoples. Scientific facts and poetic metaphor are interwoven so that we can understand how we arose from these creative processes and participate in them. With that deep time perspective, we can create a cosmological and ecological ethics for our planetary future. Journey of the Universe then is an inspiring story and a functional cosmology. This is because it harnesses the energy of awe and wonder for the multiple efforts of humans to contribute to the flourishing of the Earth community. This is what Thomas Berry called the great work in which humans will become a mutually enhancing presence for Earth systems and society. Within this cosmological perspective, we can ask, what is humankind in relation to 13.7 billion years of universe history? What is our place in the framework of 4.6 billion years of Earth history? How can we foster the continuity and integrity of life systems? Our present time of great transition or great turning is calling forth new principles and perspectives, policies, and practices. I'm going to jump to the end here. Indeed, there are hundreds of thousands of people around the planet who are participating in this transformative work for improved systems of energy and technology, agriculture and food, economics and politics, education and the arts. The journey of the universe then invites the reader to step back, to explore and assimilate our cosmological context, just as scientific cosmology is giving us an understanding of the origins of the universe and unfolding of life. Philosophical and poetic reflection on this cosmology brings us a fresh perspective regarding our place in the universe. We hope you will join in the great story that gives a context for the great work still ahead for the flourishing of the Earth community. Thank you so much.
네, 이블린 터커.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker, for your inspiring work. We are faced with a planetary crisis and we're finding a new solution. And in order to set a new foundation for ethics, we cannot just rely on technology and data. We also need to look to the non-material side. We have to look into the humanities, the philosophy, and the spirits. We need to integrate them and find a multifaceted solution. And so she gave us that challenge and homework. Professor Tucker is well versed in Eastern philosophies, and she tried to find out the ecological aspects that are hidden in the Eastern beliefs and religions. And what I was impressed about was as the foundation of the new solution, she gave us the 6 R's. So one is reference for the profound ecological processes, respect for Earth species, reciprocity in human nature relations, and restraint and use of natural resources. And as was mentioned by Professor Song and Ms. Tucker and Ms. Gore, we need to be responsible, responsibility of humans, and that was the 5th R. And we need to combine these efforts and the 6th R, restoration. So the 6 R's were quite impressive. Having listened to the 3 presentations, we need to diagnose the current planetary crisis and what should we consider as the elements of the foundation for new ethics. I think we can build on the 6 R's. Professor Song talked about technological innovations and the methodology of synthetic biology, and we need to gain consensus and resolve any ethical issues. And in building the discourse, we need to have some compassion and we have to have solidarity with the people that are marginalized. We have about 10 minutes left in the session. I would like to ask the 3 speakers who are here. I think it's the first time that we are having these prestigious speakers in just one session, and you may have questions for one another. Is there a comment or a question that you would like to ask of each other? Please go ahead, anyone.
대표님 송.
Respond to the idea that these movements that she's so beautifully identified, I think we've seen an explosion of them recently. But I want to just respond to what we were talking about before. Do you see this? It's been a long time coming to get the ethical and spiritual values going. So I just want to draw you out on how you see how quickly this has happened or the time frame in which this is emerging, which is very encouraging, I think.
Yes, thank you for that question. It is true that now there is so much more awareness, so many more movements, and even in the business community, we see so much movement for ESG, as was mentioned. So I see it as very hopeful.
That's great. And Kiwan, I wonder if I could ask you
Yes.
from the science community, do you see an interest now in ethics emerging, apart even from ESG, which is terrific in some ways, but are scientists, do you think, more open to this ethical and values-based approach?
아, 아, 영어로 얘기해야 되네. 저기
To be honest,
the scientists and technology, engineers are so immersed in their research. So there are groups that are interested in ethical values of science and technology, but most of us are not actually aware of this importance of the ethics while doing the science. So now we just started different kind of movements, the ethics, about the education of ethics in science field, but it's still just in the beginning stage, I think.
Mm-hmm. Kumsil, may I
네.
ask you also,
네.
have you seen some openings and progress in the last maybe just even a couple years because climate change and environmental disasters are elevating? Do you see people more concerned than maybe before in Korea or elsewhere?
한국의
As for Korea, especially in 2021, the Carbon Neutral Commission was established, and so there is a legal movement, and so we are transitioning to a net zero community, and the roles of the enterprises are becoming quite significant. There is such an ESG boom among the corporate sector, so this is a good thing. And as was mentioned during the session, the current crisis, can it be overcome? And can we just reduce the carbon emissions by X% and then solve this problem fundamentally without thinking about the root cause, without thinking about who we are as human beings? What did we do wrong and what should we do right? Can we just leave out ethical discourses? I think that is still lacking in Korea, so that's what concerns me, and that's why this session is so valuable to me. My personal wish is that at the World Knowledge Forum, I hope there will be more sessions that deal with integrative approaches that also encompass the ethical side and the ecological aspects. And so that's why this is very meaningful to have this talk.
I just want to also say that I think it's still new, even in the West, and certainly in the US, and scientists, just as was said, don't quite get it yet. But I do think they feel some progress, the doors are beginning to open. And I'll just give one interesting example. This weekend, we have a website it's called Old Growth Trees, and it's about forests and trees, and it's with Orion Magazine, a great nature writing magazine. And these are some of the great nature writers from the UK and the US. And there's like 4,500 people signed up to listen to this because I think people are realizing our Earth community is at stake. As Thomas Berry said so many times, this is a communion of subjects. So I'm encouraged, even though this is modest growth but steady openings, that together we can actually make a difference over time and into the lives of Karena's children and their children as well. Karena, I bet your own children get this, though, quite well, don't they? Understand it?
The young people do have it seems, a consciousness about how we can make life better for people's health, not just physical health, but also emotional and mental and even spiritual health, by making more reconnection to nature, by living more in balance and with integrity. And these are important topics as we talk about this subject. It's nice to have the private sector exploring new investments, but if it's only just for the sake of advertising, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. It needs to be grounded in what will change people's lives. And the voices of young people are so important because they care about what's real. And so often that is about health, well-being, happiness. I love what you said, Dr. Tucker, how you brought the Taoism about the microcosm and the macrocosm, human health being microcosm of the planet and nature. And I think that's something I find that is a sensibility that a lot of young people sort of have naturally. And so I do find that as we draw from these sources of wisdom and as we listen to these new voices, we can find our way forward.
Yeah, beautiful.
네,
I feel the
오늘
same with our
네,
students. Yeah, sorry, Kumseo, go ahead. Just the hope in the young people, our students, too.
네,
Please,
감사합니다. 여러분,
Thank you once again, the three speakers, for your wonderful talks. I hope that this session will be a beginning and it has given us a lot to think about. We need to take a leap forward toward recovery. Thank you very much.